So, hello everybody, and welcome to another talk. Today I'm going to be speaking with Roy Gillett. He's president of the British Astrological Association. Did I get that
Yeah,
right? You only told me a minute ago, but my memory's
yeah,
so short
yeah.
these
It's
days.
called the Astrological Association, and it's based in the United Kingdom. Yeah,
Okay.
brilliant.
So I should just do a little bit of background. We have a mutual friend, Linda Day, herself a very good Western astrologer, and I and Linda sort of occasionally have conversations. So I'm very interested in the Western system, and I always ask Linda just for a little bit of background on it. And occasionally Roy always crops up in the conversation. And I remember back in I think it was 2015 when I was, excuse me, when I was writing my book, my Jyotish book. I wanted to get a Western astrologer's take on the tropical and the sidereal zodiac, just to see how they were looking at the two and to get an interpretation on that. And Linda kindly put me on to Roy, and he was very helpful, helped me with the book, and he gave me a good bit of information for that as well. So eternally grateful for your help on that, Roy.
Mm.
Thank you very much. So I thought I'd invite Roy on today just to maybe just talk a little bit about the Western system, but primarily about his work, what he's doing, his background, how he got interested in this. And I know that you do crop up, if you do a kind of a search for you on Google, you'll see you pop up on various things where you're talking about the about Jyotish, the Indian system as well. So obviously, I know you're probably a little bit shy about talking about it, but I think you have a good understanding of that system or a good background. You've had a lot of influence from that over the years, so perhaps something you could expand upon as well. So yeah, over to you, Roy. If you want to just tell people who you are and how you got into this amazing subject.
Well, I mean, I could go on a long time, but I think it's best if I just say a couple of things and then you sort of ask me to develop. So you become my audience rather than I'm just rattling on. But basically, it is quite interesting actually because I first got into astrology in the early 70s, 1970s. And for various reasons, I found myself traveling and I spent 10 months in India in 1977 and the I actually started doing paid interpretations in India for tourists in McLeod Ganj in near Dharamsala in northern India. And at the same time, I was very aware of the Indian tradition of Vedic astrology. In fact, I visited a great holy astrologer in Deprayag in on the way up to Hardwar, from Hardwar, past Rishikesh, up to Badranath. So, I was aware of it, of Vedic astrology, and in various times since then, I've been to talks on Vedic astrology. I've had friends. I've worked with people that Vedic astrology, know people like Camilla Sutton and Andrew Voss on various conferences and been to a major conference in Kerala some years ago. So I've always been very close in sympathy and support. Also went to a very major conference in 2018 in Calcutta, and the link between Western and Eastern astrology has always attracted me, but my practice is Western astrology. So I don't know if you want to talk about the difference between the zodiacs or anything specifically technical, or where you want this to go from that point of general introduction, Andrew.
I think more, I'd be more interested to hear about your kind of Western perspective, really, rather than, I mean, obviously this channel already caters for people who are interested in Jyotish and the sort of Vedic philosophy, but it'd be
Mm.
interesting to hear about sort of, what have you found? What is it that attracted you most? And, talk about maybe techniques that you're using. And I know obviously you are a representative or you are selling Solar Fire in the UK, which is probably
Yeah.
the biggest Western astrological software available. It is the number one, right? I think I'd be right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is still, yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, just first of all, it might interest you because I'm not going to go on too much about what's right, sidereal or tropical, but I've always had this idea. I mean, I was puzzling with that ever since I started way back in the 70s. To what extent can you, always with astrology, it's always a good idea not to say my way is right and your way is wrong, but you have a way of looking at it, and I have a way of looking at it, and other people have a way of looking at it. And the way we look at it is very much a reflection of where we're standing in the world. with the Vedic, with my experience in India, particularly in those first 10 months, I've visited several times since, is the cultural difference between Eastern and Western societies. And very much the karma of, if you take this idea of astrology, it allows for the precession of the equinoxes and therefore is reflecting the actual position in the heavens. And if you look at Indian culture particularly, it is a kind of, well, we're on the earth, we're dealing with on the earth, and how we deal with on the earth is very much to do with the karma that we have left at the end of our life for our reincarnation. And so the whole idea is to not try to change the world, or this fundamental cultural thing. I know things are changing a bit in India at the moment, but you know, the basic idea of the culture is that is not to change it, but to make the best of it and to enrich it in a very positive way, and to therefore grow in our sort of tolerance and understanding. That's the basic fundamental philosophy. Western society, very different. The tropical, how it should be. You know, because the tropical is what the zodiac will be if the Earth was the right way around, if the Earth wasn't tilted on its axis. That's what you would see. And so tropical astrology is very seasonal related. There's all sorts of discussions of whether it's valid to use tropical, but the point, it is an aspirational way of looking at the universe. And therefore, with a Western society, you're always trying to change and improve things. Now, of course, the cultural change of the last 100 years or so, and maybe a bit longer, has meant that the Western view, the tropical view, has increasingly come into the culture and become a part of the culture all over the world, global village and all that sort of stuff. But that's the basic distinction. Now, therefore, if you're living in Western society, then the tropical a position is a more valid way of looking at how things are likely to be and how you're likely to be because of the cultural background. And in traditional Indian society, the sidereal way. So that's the first thing. I just wanted to mention that. I don't know what to say. My view of astrology is very simple. What has happened over the years that I've been practicing has been this incredible ability to learn more and more about the past of astrology, the history of astrology. It's very interesting. You look at the history of Western astrology, all the stuff that's been rediscovered over the last few decades is bringing the traditional view of astrology as practiced in the West very close to the more Vedic view. The methodology in that is quite similar. So it gives you a feeling of a route coming from a similar route, that somehow the links have got lost, particularly from the Western perspective. The other side that's changed in astrology in these recent decades is that this inclusion of other bodies, the interest in asteroids, the interest in trans-Pluto, trans-Neptunian or trans-Pluto planets, the centaurs, you know, midpoints, harmonics, many sort of techniques, modern techniques, cosmobiology developed into midpoint studies. And so, you know, you've got this vast thing. You've got solar fire will do all these things. Not that we necessarily think you should or shouldn't do them.
So there's no real consensus about whether these things should even be used, and it's not like all Western astrologers will say we accept and use the asteroids, or we use the trans-Plutonians or whatever. But so there's still a little bit of there's a lot of difference out there, in the Western.
Well, yeah, I mean, and again, I always say with astrology, don't say I'm right and you're wrong. Say that's a way of looking at things. So, I mean, for example, I'm not. If I was to ask me to interpret it, I could probably calculate a southern or northern Vedic chart and give a list of bhuktas and dashas and all that sort of stuff. But dashas and bhuktas, but I couldn't interpret it very well. But I do understand basic methods, particularly from classical Western stuff that's been discovered over recent decades. The idea of using whole Earth, of transmoving and moving planets from one sign to the other, where rulerships are. Very similar to the way the Vedic system works, the way the Eastern system works. I understand that in a fragmentary way.
Right.
And I use it in my ordinary Western interpretations.
Right.
So if I'm doing a chart for someone, I might use the fact that a planet is in a sign, in a house, and its rulership is there, and yet the ruling planet is somewhere else. And I might even move the chart around so that if I want to find out about a person's father, if you use the 10th house as the father, I put the 10th house in the first house, and then I find out about the father. These are all quite ancient techniques, but my basic approach is very simple, is to just look at the main planets, including Pluto, and to, how can I put it, interpret them. Because my feeling is we live in the solar system, and the dominant energies are the planets that hold the whole system in place. Now, obviously, the centaurs have a part of that story, and the far out planets are a story in the distance. But the real energy force, the status that we're caught in, is in terms of the main planets, conventional planets, and that's where my interpretation lies.
So basically, from a Vedic perspective, okay, so we're using the 7 planets, we use the 2 nodes, the same as Western. I mean, we have upagrahas, which are like children of, or like lesser forms or shadows of planets. So, there are a lot of techniques in Vedic as well, which are either used or not used. They are there. There are some astrologers that like to use them and don't. And I've noticed, because I like to watch a lot of YouTube videos where just astrologers across the board are talking. So, for instance, I see Hellenistic stuff is getting very popular now.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, this is where it's close. It's close. Yeah,
it's like these whole sign houses. It's almost like moving a little bit back towards the Vedic. So, how much of that practice do you see across the board? You're meeting a lot of astrologers. Is that all being widely adopted, or are they still wanting?
There's a guy you probably come across called Chris Brennan, who's been very influential in this. In fact, I mean, the whole thing developed. Robert Hand and Robert Schmidt and a man called Robert Zola. Schmidt and Zola are now passed, but they got together and tried to rediscover the roots of of Western astrology. This is how the Hellenistic thing. Chris Brennan was a student of Robert Schmidt, and continued his tradition, and has been very influential with new astrologers. So you come across new astrologers who insist that whole house is the only way, whole sign house is the only way of interpreting charts, following Chris's example. And this means that the old system, which has been rediscovered over the last few decades, is being introduced to a vast number, a considerable number of new astrologers of a new generation. This alongside the general interest, which is expanding rapidly on the web. So yes, if these Hellenistic astrologers was to look at the Vedic system, they may find a lot to cross-fertilize. Because what I like is the interpretation. Now, take one specific example. In the Western system, the North Node, Ratu, is considered to be the aspirational, the new, the great forward. It follows on what I started talking about, the great new future, what you're going to, your aspiration, all that sort of stuff. And the South Node, or is considered to be what the old stuff, where you've been, what the old familiar stuff, the cheesy old way of looking at things.
Cheesy, I like that.
It's reversed in Vedic, isn't it? That Rahu is the overreacher. And I'm being simplistic, but my understanding is that Rahu is more seen as an overreacher, and Ketu is is more the traditional, the reliable one, the one that respects the fundamentals. Now, I remember very interestingly, I was staying for a couple of nights with a Vedic astrologer in New Delhi many years ago, and he pointed out to me that if you got the South Node in the 12th house, there's a very good chance of a positive reincarnation. Now, I wouldn't actually have said that from a Western perspective. Quite the opposite. I mean, you can't get away from the old way. It was completely the opposite. So there is these cultural differences very strongly there, I think.
I would sort of say, yeah, I mean, looking at it, I mean, from my understanding of it, of course, it's only based on how I learned it or my understanding. I would say, yes, K2 in the 12th could be good for moksha. So you might attain some liberation or great insights in life. But generally, malefics in the 12th are not considered. That's like the way you kind of check out. It's like the end of, or represents the end of life. I know the 8th is kind of like the death house, but the 12th, they say it's how you leave this world. And you know,
Yeah.
Venus in the 12th, you might die in a very expensive bed in a nice, expensive hotel or something. Saturn in the 12th, it might be very grim. You know, you might end up with a sort of hard, uncomfortable bed beneath you. So mixed blessings really. It's good for some things, but it's like anything in the chart, isn't it? It depends on the sign and where it is, the house, and the nature of the planet and aspects. Actually, that's the thing that I'd like to talk about is the aspects of one of the biggest difference I see between the two systems. So we use very basic aspects in Vedic. You know, they're quite simplistic compared with the Western. How is that something you've sort of looked at and thought, when you've looked at Vedic, you thought, wow, that's so simplistic, you know?
Well, you see, first of all, you might say that the Western system is more complex in aspects. Well, that depends on the astrologer. I mean, I just use the 90-degree multiples, the 60-degree multiples. I don't use quintiles, biquintiles, quetzalcoatls, or what have you. You know, I don't use those so much. But if you consider that, these other aspects, these more obscure aspects, wouldn't be used in Vedic astrology, are in fact really reflections of harmonics. And you do use harmonics in Vedic astrology in a different way. It's a different way of telling it. So in many ways, it's a question of understanding what is the structure or the technical foundation of that technique, and there may be more in common than you realize. It's just approached in a different way. Now, as far as Vedic is concerned, I haven't really looked at aspects a lot in Vedic astrology. I have to confess my ignorance. I'm more knowledgeable of how to lay out the chart and how you transpose. And then if I only studied properly, I might know something about the meaning of planets in particular signs and the strength and weakness of cardinal, fixed and mutable signs and cadence signs and things like that. And so, you know, I know all those factors are very important and have specific meanings in Vedic interpretive tradition, which I'm aware of, but haven't studied enough as much as I have with the Western system, because I don't use it that often.
So you're using you're saying you're only using like one or two types of aspect. You're not really going, because when I talk to a lot of Western astrologers, they're saying blah 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 this and blah, and I think I don't really. They seem so complex. But basically, you're just using these kind of two.
I use conjunctions, squares, oppositions, trines, sextiles, semisextiles, semisquares, quincunxes. Because the strain, I feel the strain between, you know, the 150-degree is an interesting strain energy in the chart. That's my basic sort of palette of aspects. People talk about other types of aspects, and we have a whole list of them in Solar Fire. You can even make up your own aspects if you like.
Oh, wow.
You know, I find that gives me enough, because what I'm interested in is the tension that people are feeling, the ease of flow that people are experiencing, and the interaction between these two forces, and helping clients, if I'm doing a consultation, to cope with problems and difficulties and pressures and turn them around to advantages, and B, not to get too carried away when things go so easy. And the relate between them. I mean, I had a lot of interesting experience doing charts in India, particularly learning about stress aspects and observing. Because we were traveling, it's the old days, you know, in the 70s, we were traveling on a shoestring. And so we were living in fairly poor circumstances. And you come across people with these amazing charts who had incredible tension in their chart, particularly, and yet they were quite saintly in their demeanour, and it's the way that they'd handled the stress, and that taught me a lot about stress aspects. And then, of course, you spend time with people who are far fortunate in their lives, who are quite rich and well off and done very well, and all things come easily to them. And you realise they live in quite a lot of dissatisfaction all the same. And from these observation of the world, you learn how to interpret everybody's chart by seeing how the section. Now, that's my interest in aspects. It's not about some sort of 135. Well, 135 is relevant as a Session quadrate, so it's a half a 90-degree multiple, isn't it? But beyond that, I didn't find it useful to use other aspects.
Interesting. I primarily studied in Sri Lanka. So when I was there, it's the island of gems. So everybody wears a Navaratna, the gems for the planets, and they wear these rings. And you tell anybody that you're interested in astrology, the first thing you do is grab your hand, and they look at your hand and they start looking at the part. It was difficult to find an astrologer who would actually draw a chart over there. Of course, they'll do that, but it's generally the man on the street would be more like a palmist. They're just looking for signs in the palm, constructing a chart. But when you were studying, did you find the same thing, or did you find if they were drawing a chart for you, how were they doing it? Would they do it all by hand, or they would get out the ephemeris and sort of?
Well, you're talking about Vedic astrology in India.
When you were in India, traveling, yeah.
Yeah, not too often. I'm trying to remember it now. There was always the place where there's a chart for everyone who's already been drawn up, isn't there? I forget what I heard about that. I never went to. Yeah. I was in a cafe once, and a guy came. Well, he's near where Sai Baba was in. Down in southern India. Got the name of the place now. But I was there between trains, and this guy grabs my hand and virtually tells me when I'm going to live and when I'm going to die, and everything. Just by looking at the palm of my hand. That was an interesting experience. But I didn't have a lot of Vedic charts done. I stayed with Vedic people occasionally, and we shared ideas. But it's ironic that I was practicing tropical astrology in India. I did probably hundreds of charts over 3 months in Dharamsala, but it was all based on the Western system I'd arrived in India knowing about.
How did the Indians take to you doing that then? I mean, what was their reaction?
Well, it was mainly for foreign students, although the owner of the property we were renting got me to do a chart for her son, who had fallen in love with this woman in Delhi. And was living in Delhi and had fallen in love with this woman, wanted to marry her, and the parents were completely against it, and they hoped that a Western astrologer might be able to change their son's mind. Well, they didn't tell me that, but that's what I realised when I came to do the charts. And it was crazy because they both had this incredible Aries energy from a Western perspective. They were totally sort of impulsive in their decisions and all the rest of it. So in many ways, but occasionally that happened. But there wasn't any well, you can't do it that way. I didn't get that feeling at all. And bearing in mind, I was living in a Tibetan community to a certain extent, there are Indians there as well. The Tibetans use a combination of Indian sidereal and Chinese, what they call Nyatsi system of archetypes. And the Tibetan system incorporates, I think, the I Ching as well as 9 muas. And you could actually do a time, date and place calculation, but it's all in terms of archetypes rather than based on the actual the zodiac itself, or it seems not to be based on the zodiac. I've never got to the bottom of what the technical basis of doing these calculations is. I'm ignorant. I have another ignorant conversation with a Chinese astrologer on it, I guess, about that. But I've always wanted to know how it was determined. There is a time, date and place, which gives you all these archetypal symbols. The idea of the year of whatever it is just a very teeny bit that we know about in the West. But the real system is far more complex.
I think it's more like a day master, hour master. And
exactly, yeah.
And it's usually completely different to what you've been told to do with your year. So just moving back to the signs, actually, it just caught my attention when you said that. So that could be another potential area of difference between the two. I know that Vedically they concentrate quite a lot on the signs and the sort of qualities of the signs. How much of that is true in Western? Are you really thinking about the sort of the zodiacal signs as well? If you see Sun in Taurus, it is Taurus. Do you have?
Yeah. Well, this is where we come back to that distinction I made between the Western and Eastern attitude. Like my chart, for example. I mean, I'm in the Western system. I've got 4 planets in Aquarius, the Moon in Gemini, and Sagittarius rising. So I'm a kind of pioneering teacher, really, with revolutionary ideas and a strong sense of humanitarian care for the universe. That's my Western perspective. Excuse me. From a Vedic point of view, most of the Aquarius energy moves into Capricorn. The moon moves into Taurus, and the ascendant is in Scorpio. I'm an effective entrepreneur or enabler of a good sort of well-organized system. So, I found that generally in India, I'm respected as even the last time I visited, I had very sort of senior practical, I was treated more like what the Vedic view, not because they'd done my chart, but that was just the natural way it came across. So, I mean, it's I say, it's cultural. It's the sort of society you live in, and it's what that society expects. Now, what's happened to India over the last 10, 20 years or so, this incredible explosion of Indian technology. I mean, when I was in India in the 70s to speak to someone on the phone from any distance away, you were shouting as if the phone wasn't there and you were just shouting. You queued up for ages to change money and everything. Completely different now. Now, a lot of Indian call centers are advising Westerners on how to use their machines. So this incredible change has happened. But the basic astrological system you're using is still based on the system and culture that I know about 50 years ago.
Amazing. Yeah, it's just I'm sort of fascinated to hear all these conversations about where it's all going. Particularly, you were saying about the influence of, say, the whole sign houses, because of our technology now, because everyone's getting their information off of. We've basically become like a YouTube society. And if I want to do it now, I like change my battery in my watch. I go on YouTube to see it and find my watch and find somebody actually changing it. So it's become a little bit like that. So I understand, or you could see how people that were young now, sort of 18, 25, suddenly thinking, actually, I would like to learn astrology. And that's kind of what they're getting exposed to, because the medium of absorption is so accessible for them, isn't it? They go on YouTube, and like you say, you've got like the astrology podcasts going on, and they can just get this information. Whereas, before you had to go and buy a book, or go and listen to a lecture, or do a course. The sort of the indoctrination programs become completely different.
Yeah, well, of course, I got into astrology using a book called The Complete Astrologer. It was published initially in 1971. It was written by a lovely couple called Derek and Julia Parker. And that was like the internet to a whole new culture. Because it put everything, the interpretation, some printed ephemeris and tables of houses, all the basic things you needed to calculate a chart, all in one book. And that was the best you could do. When I was doing all this work initially in India, I cut out some pages from a book like that and some basic interpretation information. So it's narrowed down to a thin little thing, because that's all I could carry in my rucksack. And my wife was calculating the charts as I was interpreting them. So we would go to a flea market maybe and put out the rug, and people come, I want my chart, my time, date and place of birth. She would work it all out, draw it out roughly.
How quickly would it take her to work that out then? How quickly could she do that?
I honestly can't remember now, but it wouldn't be more than about 10 minutes or so.
I mean, that's like our mutual friend Linda. I mean, she's very good like that. I can just sort of and she'll just have an ephemeris out, and she's worked it out before I've even typed it in on the computer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my colleague Nick Campion, who many people heard of because he runs an academic course in England for astrologers and astrophysicists. But he was greeted at the airport in New York Washington, I think, by Joan Quigley, who was Ronald Reagan's astrologer. And by asking his time, date, and place of birth, she did his chart in her head while they were driving to the hotel in the taxi.
Wow.
That's the way it was. I mean, nowadays, all these young people are coming into astrology on the internet. They can go into Astro Dynst, or they can go to Astrolab.com and have the chart calculated for them. If they buy Solar Fire, they can get almost any bit of information. Like, in the time it's going to take me to say I was born on a certain date at a certain time and in a certain place, I can actually have a natal chart on the screen, and I can press a button and animate it, and it will give me the progressions and transits to that particular day, and I can be talking to you now about your horoscope and your life.
Wow.
And I haven't done anything except press a few buttons. That's the change from the way we started to the way it is now. Bringing astrology to the masses, and particularly to the younger generation, particularly at a time when most of the systems and value systems are being completely questioned. I mean, since the Saturn-Neptune squares in the 2015, 2016, the idea of truth has become very problematic. And so people are looking for some kind of fundamental structural system that is objective to personal preference and opinion. And that astrology has the potential to do that. And I think, in their hearts, I think the new generation are looking for some meaning that isn't based on prejudice. And astrology opens the gateway to that.
I think it's probably a good time to, we should mention that obviously you're the kind of main, in the UK, would I be right in saying you're the main retailer for Solar Fire, the software?
Yeah, I'm just not retailer, I also support it, yeah.
Okay. Oh, so you're the main, you're tech support as well. So if I
Yeah, it's not that big a deal. I mean, we're not a big operation. I mean, it's thousands of people use this program all over the world. It's enough. One guy can just about hold together support, because it doesn't need a lot of technical support. There's just a couple of wrinkles that we're fixing, but mainly it's a very easy to use self-supporting program.
I mean, across the board, most people I've come across, it's sometimes even people that are kind of more Vedically orientated, because there's a nice big Vedic section in there as well. They'll use that and have access to both, particularly people who are Western transitioning to Vedic. It could be really useful. So I was just going to say, maybe do you want to go ahead and should we do like a screenshot? I just think it'd be interesting to introduce people that haven't seen it, because it is actually very versatile. So
I could. So I mean, that's the basic screen, and obviously, I spend a whole day telling people about this program. I still haven't explained everything, so I'm not going to do that. Looking at it purely from the Vedic point of view, you can see that you have this option to choose your zodiac. So if you're going to use it as a Vedic point of view, just don't take tropical. You've got these various Vedic systems. Lahiri, I think, is the closest one. Faganal and Lahiri, it's a Western sidereal way. Lahiri is the more, it's not the only Vedic one, but it is quite well used. So you just choose that. And so, what is that? I mean, where are we, Mal? I think I've got this is my Vedic chart. So you can see that what I was telling you, that it's all Capricorn. I didn't realise it was all Capricorn.
There you go. Look, threw it all back into Capricorn. So can you change that? Oh, I can see you've got like wheel style on there. So you can do wheel style. Probably you could do the more traditional North Indian chart, which is like a diamond with the
if you want to click, to Sidereal, you just click that.
Okay.
It's now a tropical chart.
Okay.
It's become tropical, and I just click it backwards and forwards. Okay. That's the first thing. Yep. If you want to look at it from a Vedic point of view, you can do this. Wait a minute, you can go view. Now we have a lot of various page displays. This is a Vedic display, and then you've got various Vedic displays. So, for example, Vedic. So if we want to look at that one, for example. That's a standard Vedic chart with
there you go, South Indian chart with the
Yeah,
What have you got there? You've got all your planetary positions, and
yeah, and
I suppose the beauty of this is as well, because obviously it's a primarily Western. You get if you're interested in interpreting those outer planets, you've got lots of extra detail about
you
those.
could take the outer planets out if you want to be pure and only use the inners. You only use the conventional outer Saturn. I've just changed it to northern India, as you can see,
Okay.
but it also does this one. Ah, here we are. Yeah,
Yeah.
Bhaktas and
Oh, you
Dashas.
got your dashes in there as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you got Dashas and Bhaktas there.
Can you change the levels of those if you wanted to go down into finer and finer?
No, you can only go. This is the best you can get. You get the basic period and then the sub periods. It doesn't do a
Periods, yeah.
sub period, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, we should be fair and say that it's not a Vedic piece of software, but I think for what it is, it's got a very good amount of information in there if you wanted to explore that.
Yeah, let's just show you something interesting that while I was checking out for this, I did Donald Trump's chart and look at his. Oh, who's this? Oh, this is Trump. Yeah, and his actual period now. Are we up to 2026? And you can see that this whole period when he's been so dominant and increasingly dominant is all on a Jupiter dasher.
Right. Yeah.
And it's going right on to the 2030s. And then if you look at Musk's chart, his 2026, he's on a nodal. Hubristic period right the way through. So you've got Jupiter, you've got Trump expanding and Musk in your North Node.
Wow.
Does that not explain what you see in the world at the moment? This is just why it's useful to have some Vedic information, even if you are a big tropical astrologer, because it's really helpful.
I mean, how much can you sort of customize the look of this as well if you wanted to move things around a little bit, or is it more like a standard layout? I mean, is there any?
It's not. Let's have a look now. It's not as flexible as some of the Western side because not so much programming's gone into it. But let's just change this to post topic index, and I want to look at. I would like to get the bi wheel. It's a very beautiful one I saw. Oh, maybe this one.
Well, they put the two side by side, the two.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. Yeah. So now you can swap those over, I think. So the dashers and bhaktis for Musk, that is one of these is for that's Musk. And if we go to swap, yeah, that's for Trump. So you can compare the two.
Wow.
Now, as far as editing concerned, there's not too much on this square chart, unfortunately, because this is a taste of Vedic for tropical astrologers.
Yeah,
really.
yeah, sure. I mean, it's actually quite good. It would be more than sufficient to. I use 2 or 3 different softwares for Vedic. I mean, some of the basic ones and more complex ones. But to be honest, sometimes the complex ones can have too much in. I mean, I love it that it's there, but most of it, like you were saying, I don't actually use these things to their full potential. I'm probably using less than 20% of its capability, probably. If you looked at everything, like this program you're saying it's hellishly complex. It will do many things, but you're not actually using a lot of it on a daily basis.
Yeah, it all started in the early 1990s with a guy developing a program which then got connected with Astrolabe. And over the years since then, we've gone from version 1 to version 9, and we're nearly ready to launch version 10. And everything that people have suggested to us, if it's been sensible and viable, has been incorporated into the program. And that's why it's so varied. And you have to choose what parts of the program you want to use. I'm just showing you here. You asked me how you can change it. This is this is the designer page.
Yeah.
So you can add new objects, but the objects are pretty well basic for Vedic, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
And there's no flexible objects, so you can't change what's inside the dashers except by changing the dates externally.
Got it.
But so it's not as wide as you would see in a conventional Vedic program. Obviously, there's one other thing I'd show you, which is the what are these called? I always get confused.
Oh, those are
Goes
the
from
Varga charts, yeah, the divisionals.
from division from 2 to 60,
And you got pretty.
and
That's
you can
pretty
do
good.
them just like that,
You know, when you
just
were
like that.
selecting the Iron Umpture there, because that's something that quite interests me as well. Under the Iron Umpture settings for the different, we put Lahiri in there. What other Iron Umptures do they give you? So you've
There
got
you go.
Zeus, Raman. Yeah, the Yusashashi is probably the closer one that I use.
Yeah,
That's a bit more like a traditional one. Because the Lahiri's only really been around since 1955.
yeah.
So it's become the default one. But what else have you got? Is there any other in there that you can?
Ramat was La Lucy. I don't know what that one is.
Police, yeah, he's
Yeah,
kind of like that's like 1920s, 1930s. Raman is later. He had his own Iron Umpture, Krishnamurti. Yeah, probably one I would use there would be Ursha. But what about if can you manually input
it's
an
a
Iron
very
Umpture?
interesting idea. I've never been asked that one before. So these other ones. Well, wait a minute. What else we got here? You see, some of these other zodiacs, Draconic is a Western system.
Yeah,
The vernal point, starting from there. The Sri Laksheswar,
yeah,
which is
Yogyakarta,
Yogananda's
that's quite a
teacher.
popular one, but it's very
Yeah.
close to Lahiri, so there's not really a huge difference.
J.N. Basin,
That's the one.
Hari.
That's weird. You've actually got the one I use right at the bottom, the Shield Pond one. They put it's only one L in Shield.
There you go. There you go.
You can change that when you go back, and it should have an E on the end. It should be pop
Yeah,
E
well,
on the
sorry about that. But I mean, send an email. I'll tell you, if you send an email to me,
I
I will
will.
pass it on to
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah. Oh, but look,
programmers, and it'll be corrected in version 10. The answer is that doesn't have the tools to create another zodiac. But if you tell us what the basic criteria are, we can incorporate zodiacs in an upgrade.
so you as a Western astrologer using this software, what is it you like most about this system? What really stands out for you of being, talking now to Western astrologers in the audience or people who might be, like myself, I do have an interest in the Western system as well. What is
Yeah.
it that this software really offers you that makes it? Why has this become the number one software? What is it that really people?
Well, it's first of all very easy to use for a program of its complexity. Secondly, it does amazing things. Like, for example, on the if we like I was saying to you earlier, say take Trump, it types in the time, date, place, to calculate the chart, dynamic. Will that animate? That's exciting. I've never tried to animate a Vedic chart before. Let's see what happens when I do. So 1 month. Yeah.
There you go. You see, it's actually pretty sophisticated. It's not, I don't, I think you're underselling it a little bit. I think it's actually pretty good. I mean, it's not far off. Like I say, I've got top end programs that I spent more than a couple of £100 on, and stuff that I spent £30 on. And the difference between the £30 one is very good and basic, and gets you over the hump. But obviously the expensive ones, you're getting a whole load of bells and whistles in there that you may not even actually use.
Yeah, let's show you something else then. This is astrocartography, but I'm using the Vedic it's Lahiri enhancer. And so that's one of the many other things it does. This is what we're working on at the moment. There's going to be an amazing upgrade of this side of the program in version 10. But it's
So this is more like the way when you're like relocations and stuff like that. You can,
you come across this before
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, you know what it is. Essentially,
I think actually I've got a feeling that maybe Sri Jyoti Star, Andrew Voss's software might even have a version of this.
It does have, yeah. He had it. I mean, I did spent a bit of time with Andrew about. Well, this must be 20 years ago now. It sounds amazing, but and he was bringing it in then, so it definitely will have it in there. I'm sure it will. Yeah, but so there's your cartography there, the midheaven, ascendant, descendant, and IC lines, And then you've got another system of planetary directions, which are lines from where you were born,
Right.
these lines here, and so on. But you probably didn't want me to teach you about astrocartography, but
Well, no, I'm just interested. I'm just interested to look at the graphics of it. I mean, just carry. Feel free to carry on and play, and just click a few buttons. I'm just fascinated to see what's on here.
so you can move around. So, okay, so this is the Mars line. So is this, who's this, me in my chart? My Mars line? Okay, goes through France. Now, if I change the map to more Europe, France, and now I want to see where my line goes, so I use the, what's the name, square. It's going to be much more sophisticated, the new version. You see what happens when I start zooming in on that. I have to keep changing that around.
Oh, I see. So, what would you be looking for there? You're just looking for if you're relocating to a place that was somewhere close to your planetary line.
Yeah, exactly. That's it, good. Now I've got to move, if I move it around, I can move it around. That's what I want to do. Okay, so take the Mars line and the Saturn line, right? Now you put the expand focus in. Now you see how all the new towns come in. So Seaford is very interesting, actually. And Haywards Heath, that's interesting. My Saturn line, the Saturn line goes through Haywards Heath, and my Mars line goes to Seaford. There are two things in my life that I'm not going to discuss now that were particularly significant about those two places.
Oh, really?
But,
So there's a personal connection to those actual places.
Yeah, and now if I change it completely, right, so you see the Venus line and the Sun line?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is where my wife was born.
Oh, wow.
Felt called to come to England when she finished her teaching qualification, and we met in England. And then we travelled overland together, and this is the 1970s thing, to New Zealand, where I set up a consultation practice and organised conferences, and then came back to England. So there's now the other thing is Jupiter on the midheaven. This is where solar fire was created.
Oh, wow.
Adelaide.
And even in the Western system, is Jupiter traditionally the sort of the planet of astrologers, and is it kind of associated? I mean, in Vedic, we see it as a sort of it's the main planet of invocation for astrology at the beginning. It's like the sort of the
yeah. Well, it's also for me from a Western point of view, Jupiter on the midheaven is called success, career success, and public exposure. So people know me as an expert on solar fire, in the use of solar fire. And so it so happened on my natal chart, Jupiter's on the midheaven of a place I have never visited. I've been to Australia, but I've never been anywhere near Adelaide.
Right.
And yet I attracted people from Adelaide to me, and that led to a major career development in astrology. So, I mean, we got into, I don't know if you wanted to talk about solar mapping now, but it's interesting, isn't it?
So how long, if somebody's new to this, if they get this programming, how long would you say you'd need to sort of get fairly au fait with what it could do? I mean, could you be up in an hour?
The rest of your life, but to use it in a basic way that you want to calculate the chart, to do what these three things will do in a minute.
Yeah.
Right, even quicker than they will do it.
Yeah.
But then to have all that chart to look at from just about every perspective of astrology you can imagine. I would never say every, but most aspects of astrology you can imagine, or many, is just like that. It's very easy. You can use it in a more and more difficult and complicated way. For example, take this screen here. This looks impossible. But this is a way of calculating any list of events, either related to a chart or to just time generally, from the most minute movement of quick moving things over a day to a whole period of 10,000 years.
Oh, wow.
You just can set up any search in that just from this screen. And almost any techniques, like not only secondary progressions and transits, but primary directions.
Let's say if somebody very famous had a very particular conjunction of something, you could literally search 10,000 years forwards or backwards to see any ages or times when that same conjunction had occurred.
Okay, exactly. Now take this other part of the program. These are the more advanced areas of the program. You don't have to use them, but they're there. The electional search. Now, this enables you to get together a collection of events and look through time to see how often that's happening. This particular job I've got here is looking over the whole period from 499 BC to AD. It's 10,000 years.
Oh my God.
And it's looking for when Neptune, now I know this is a tropical issue, which is not a Vedic thing, so I don't know how important this is to Vedic, but on the 20th of February next year, Neptune and Saturn are exactly conjunct in 1 degree of Aries.
Right.
And this is searching for that over time.
That would be really, I mean, in Vedic, we do like Muhurta. So if we're electing, the same as you're doing Westerns, electing times to do things. So if you wanted a specific kind of, let's say you were constructing a astrological amulet or something, and it had called for Saturn to be in a particular sign and another planet to be, so it would be able to search within a sort of a block of time and find you the perfect time to do that. So that actually, for me, would be super useful, because that's actually what I'm interested in. So that would be.
And if you switch it to the sidereal zodiacs, you can use this Vedically. And also, I just wanted to interrupt you because I want to show you this alongside it. This is where you search through all the charts you've saved to find out certain qualities. So if you look through that, you will find, I mean, that this wouldn't work for searching charts, this particular bunch of stuff. But like, if you look through charts, your chart file for certain criteria, you find out, like, you could use this for people doing dating agency or something, for financial trading, where you put all the tops of a particular commodity or sort of company or something in a system. And you, in a chart file, and you search that chart file for certain qualities. And so you pick out the person or the timing. And then you can use electional search for financial astrology to find out when it next happens. So, I mean, these are sort of things that's in the program.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely things I'd be interested in. I'm quite interested in electing times to do things. So that would be sort of super useful as well. A couple of extra things I wanted to ask about was what was the idea behind, obviously with the discovery of the outer planets, so Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Prior to that, Vedically, obviously planets are assigned a sign. Now in Western, with the implementation of or bringing in those 3 new planets, quite often hear about those being assigned a zodiacal sign. What was the methodology or the thought behind that? I mean, how did?
Are you talking about rulership, or are you talking
rulership
about
of signs?
It's rulership. Go on.
I was just curious to see how that who had actually decided what was going to rule what. I think I don't know. I'm just trying to remember it. But is Neptune like Pisces?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Neptune rules Pisces, Uranus rules Aquarius, and Pluto rules Scorpio.
Yeah.
It's the quality. I don't know. Quite honestly, the short answer is I don't know why. And in fact, that's a very good question. I'll have a word with my friend Nick Campion, who may know the answer. He is the expert. He's the historian. He's written 2 books called The History of Western Astrology. If you want to have a real academic,
just curious to see. I'm
just promoting Nick Campion's Western Astrology book. Okay. You find that on everything. But as far as this is concerned, I think astrology, the point is that the discovery of these planets, it's not coincidental that they happened to be that Uranus was discovered just as the Industrial Revolution was occurring, and the first big movements towards a democratic democracy was instigated in the middle to late 18th century. It's not coincidental, is it, that the development of Romantic poetry and the then later in the century development of gas and electricity and the spiritual change, the rediscovery of Eastern astrology by the West, the question of Christianity as the only truth in the West, all came when Neptune was discovered. And it's not coincidental that Pluto was discovered just as we were beginning to learn how to split the atom. Now, what signs of the zodiac are most associated with scientific and technical change? Aquarius, Uranus. What sign of the zodiac is most connected with mystery, sensitivity, empathy, and also bitter reaction to hurt? Pisces. What sign of the zodiac is connected with death and transformation? Scorpio. So, I mean, I don't know who decided this, but it makes sense to me.
So does that mean that the normal rulership, like Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, would be bumped out? They're literally
No, they're associated. They work together. I mean, the whole thing about Saturn in Aquarius is that the big problem with Aquarius is structure. Now, Capricorn is about the material structure of the universe, or really more the Earth. Aquarius is more about the actual structure of the scientific nature of the universe. And therefore, it's about structure as well as about revolution. The reason you have revolution in Aquarius is because of the limited understanding. Every new discovery, you have to adjust the structure. But you need the structure and to have the discovery. I mean, every scientific experiment has a series of disciplines in order to isolate what you're trying to find out. That's Aquarius. It's not Capricorn. Capricorn's just the order. The Capricorn is the CEO, if you like, of this world. Aquarius is a scientist, and he's Saturn and Uranus. Same with Neptune. It's the fact that you can make a contact. Water contacts everything and everywhere. If I touch the sea in Brighton, I am touching by direct contact the sea in the other side of the world.
Got it.
Pluto, as we know, Scorpio, is about that traumatic moment that you can't escape, death and transformation. Well, that's why I would argue for that. I mean, as I say, I don't know the man I don't think anybody did proclaim it. I just think astrologers sat down and thought about it and came to the kind of conclusions that I've given you in some detail.
One last thing just before we go, it's a personal favourite of mine in Western. I know most people don't even probably not that interested in it, but I've got you on, so I'll ask you. I'm very interested in the nodes, the planetary nodes, and I'll tell you why. In a lot of the astronomical books, not the astrological, the astronomical books in the Vedic collection, and they talk a lot about the nodes in there. And it just fascinated me that they were using nodal calculations in their maths to sort of work out where all these things were. I know that in Western there is a sort of subset of astrologers that like using the planetary nodes. What's kind of your experience of those? Do you use them yourself? Are they of interest generally, or are they just too odd?
Yeah, well, if you look at my chart, I've got the North Node rising and the South Node on the descendant. So obviously I have some interest in the nodes. My understanding of the way that people look at the North Node in the West and compared it to the people when they look at it in the East. There's a book, I forget his name now, Stephen Oroya, who wrote a book on karma and reincarnation and nodal energy. I personally think that the whole chart is about karma and reincarnation. It's not just the nodes, but the nodes have a point, which essentially it is the relationship between the sun and moon. So you have to have the nodes near the sun and moon in order to get an eclipse, be it solar or lunar. In fact, it's when the nodes come close that you get solar and lunar eclipses, isn't it? Yeah, roughly at the similar time, the solars and the lunars. And so obviously it's the two key things that we experience, the sun and moon, the way we create, the way we react, and when our reactions, our creations are together. So obviously it's got quite important karmic significance, and in particular our aspirations, where we try to go. I mean, my aspiration, North Node, is to try and point the way to people. It's 1 degree Sagittarius. Now, all right, I know Vedically it's in Scorpio, but there we go.
But I was thinking also really not so much about the moon's nodes. I meant more like the planetary nodes themselves. So
planetary nodes.
yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, perhaps I didn't explain.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, sorry, but I'll give you a little talk on the subject. Right. Planetary nodes. Solarfire calculates them.
And very well, because I've used that before to work out stuff. It's been very good.
Yeah. Very easy to find them. Unfortunately, I've never used them really. But I don't know. I mean, I could start thinking, I could start theorizing about the meaning of it. Okay, take the node of Mars. So what we're talking about is that Mars, well, what is the node of Mars actually? What is it? I mean, I know what, is it Mars, what is Mars with? You tell me.
Oh, it's just I think it's where they basically cross. Depends whether you calculate them geocentrically or heliocentrically. So from the sun's point of view, it would be the point where if you projected the sun's equator out into space, it would be the point that Mars crosses.
Okay, it's Mars crossing the sun's line. Yeah. Okay. So sun Mars.
But geocentrically calculated, it would be different, obviously, because it's from our perspective, and we're not. We have our orbit around the sun as well. So it depends whether you're taking the Earth's orbit as the point of calculation or the sun's.
Yeah. Well, I always think that the nodes are really. I mean, generally astrology is a geocentric. It's ironic that people say that astrologers don't understand that we live in a heliocentric universe. I think it's ironic that astronomers don't understand that we live on the Earth.
Yeah.
I didn't answer your question. I leave that little joke in, but I think your point was, what does it mean? Well, we live on the Earth to start with. So when the Mars is on the Mars path and the Sun's path cross, either going up or going down, because it's rising or so, you get a kind of similar nodal influence. So with a Mars, if we're going to take Mars as being about action, it's about new action with the North Node of Mars and about previous action. So drawing, and this is interesting. I mean, it's a new field. I never thought of working this out, but always the basic ideas that, you can always extrapolate from lunar nodes to Mars nodes by the same principle. So if you know what Mars means, you know what the sun means, you know what rising and setting nodes are, then you can say exactly what it is. It is to do with new action and old action, with new aggression and old aggression. Now, having said that, now let's have a bit of fun and look through when the the Mars node, when there is a North Node Mars, and see how it relates to wars and conflicts and aggression, and also innovation. Because Mars isn't negative, all negative. And you do the same with all the planets. So yes, it's a rich area of exploration, which I don't know anybody's done it. So here you go. That's a challenge.
Well, I'm not putting myself up for the job. I just noticed when I was reading these old astronomical classics from India, they talk about, they would always know where the node of the planet was, and that would be their center point. And from there, they knew how fast it moved and in what direction. So they would use that. Well, they would aid in their calculation of exactly where it was on the zodiac. So the nodes were important, even though they're not mentioned as an astrological point of view. They're a reference point mathematically. I remember when I was calculating something from the book, Linda kindly did a calculation in Solar Fire for me, and I was amazed how good it was. I said, that's a really nice thing to have on the software. It calculated it very clearly, and you could
Yeah,
click between heliocentric and geocentric to see the differences from an
yeah,
Earth or a
yeah,
sun-centered
yeah,
perspective. So I
yeah,
just wanted to ask
yeah.
you about that. It was something that interested me.
No, I mean, I think, you've opened my mind you've jogged me into thinking about this. And I think what I just said is rather important, particularly with the way the world is at the moment, to look at Mars nodes. I don't know to check if I could do it on an electional search. It would be very interesting to see if an electrical search would do planetary nodes. It might not do them, but you could still do it on the other system I showed you, the transits and progression screen. But to check through time to see when the nodes were, when the nodes occurred, the nodal points occurred, would be very interesting to compare it to events on the Earth,
Definitely.
and hence, therefore, events in people's lives.
Well, I think we better wrap it up there. We'll leave it there. Just before we finish, how do people go? If I'm interested, I'd like to get hold of the software. How's the best? How's the
Yeah.
easiest way to get hold of you? What's your kind of main contact preferences? How do you like me?
Yeah, I think if you'll let me share the screen,
Yeah, you
is it all
carry
right
on.
to share? Yeah. So if people want to make contact, here's the website. The
Yeah.
address is quite simple: https :// crucial astro tools, all one word, .co.uk.
Okay.
If you scroll down to the bottom of the page
Yep.
there, if you want to get in touch with me, click contact at the bottom of the page. And well, that's the email. You just click email and you get through to me like way.
That
Or
goes so that info address goes straight to you, right?
yeah, it comes straight to me.
Yeah.
And also, you got my address and telephone number there if you need
Okay.
it. Now, obviously, Astrolabe is in America. That's only if you're buying software or need support for that. But you come to me first in any case. But if people want to make an initial contact, then all they need to do is to click the email there or to phone me up on that number in
Okay.
England.
I'll put that email up as the main point of contact for you, and then obviously I'll point them towards this website, and I'll do a screenshot of the website as well.
Yeah.
And how about if people would like to have a reading with you? Are you still doing analysis? Can you slot it in with busy schedule?
I don't earn my living by doing readings, but obviously I've done thousands of readings over the years, and for a long time was a major consulting astrologer. I'll be happy to do any readings if people want me to, but it's just the thing to do is to email me or to phone me up. You've got both contacts there.
Yeah, let's do that. That's brilliant. Well, I'll put all that information up. That's great, Roy. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate your time. I know you're super busy, so thank you for coming on and speaking to us about the software and your astrological interests. And I'm sure people will get in contact if they want to learn more about Solar Fire. Great to know that you're doing that. I think it's nice to have introduced you as well, because if at least people feel they need some backup or contact you, they can put the sort of face with the name, if you know
Yeah.
what I mean. It makes it a bit more friendly, doesn't it? User
Well,
friendly.
hopefully, yeah.
So that's brilliant. Well, thank you for coming on. Great. I mean, it was really good to speak to you, and I'm sure people will be in contact. So yeah, thank
Bye
you.
for now.